Welcome back, and in this video we're going to take a look at actually resculpting some greens and the sort of work that you should do before porting a course. Now we're looking here at the greens on the front nine at Akashi Shore. This was my first 2K project, and as a result I wanted the greens to be really benign and the course to play on the more forgiving side. Probably the easiest course I'd say I've ever built, although it's one I still really like, so wanting to port this over to the new game, and they still have strategic interest, they're just very toned down. Now, as we zoom through most of them, you'll see that there's not a huge amount of red slopes on them. There's lots of little bits of orange and light green, and you could be forgiven for thinking that this is pretty much good to go. However, there's still a lot of things that we need to bear in mind when porting courses, and particularly when touching up greens. And just zooming around these, I can see there's a fair few bits that I'd want to change. Now, they still probably will play all right. There's just certain things with the ball physics and how the ball reacts on the green that we're going to want to think about a little bit more. So we're going to look at the first. And what we're going to do is I'm going to first of all talk through these are the things I don't like or would change, without necessarily changing the strategic intent of the whole. It's how it's more updating it for this game. And secondly, then going through what tools I'll use, and then I'll time lapse it so that you don't get bored to death. Now, firstly, we've got these little runoffs on the edge. Now, in the previous game, those wouldn't have necessarily always run the ball off the green. But we have to be really mindful of them now, particularly as a putt above the pin can potentially roll off the green, which is something that I think we should limit as much as possible. And if you are, that fall off should be really, really clear. The worst kind of green runoff is where it's basically just running down a tiny little bit and the ball's going to stop here, because that's just really irritating. It's not meant to run off, and it comes across as a designer error, which is basically what it is. Now, you will have greens that definitely do run off and are meant to run off. I'm trying to think of one. So potentially 6. Well, we've got this big fall off here. If I wanted to and make that a proper runoff, that would be justifiable because that's kind of a collection area. Same is true here. Those ones kind of make sense, but if it's running off here, that's less helpful because it's not supposed to be there. Trying to think of another that might do it. 11 potentially. Again, you've got a big fall off on the right hand side. However, this one suffers a little bit more from that slope to slope issue that is the case in this game that wasn't in 21. Now, as a solitary par 3 that does this, I don't really mind pulling that trick once, but I'll probably still soften it. So leaping back to 1, that little runoff there is going to be something we're getting rid of completely. And in fact, around here as well, you don't want someone landing up here and rather than being funneled towards the pin, which is what my intent would have been, they get kicked off the green and just have a chip from here. That's not going to be much fun. Same is true here. So we're going to soften those. The way we're going to do that is we're going to be taking the raise tool here, popping it up just a couple and doing it off the edge. As you can see, the middle is going to come up. This part's going to come up less, therefore it's creating that gradient from this side to this side. The way I do it is just basically raise, so like click and drag a couple of times, and just paying attention to the beads. So the other thing we probably want to do is create a bit more of a flatter area here. You can see that slope is consistent and it's dropping off. What we don't really want is those putts rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling and gone. So I might try and make this a little bit flatter just to build in a bit more forgiveness if you are putting from above the pin. Because the intent was never that someone would roll off the green. You got to think back to what you designed this hole and how you wanted it to play. I don't want people rolling off the green from that putt. And whilst it still would be a bad putt to roll off the green, that's currently a possibility. We're also going to get rid of this. That's not meant to be a false front. I know it's slightly elevated, but again, I don't want a ball that lands and looks like it stops here to suddenly roll off and fall here. And that's the thing we've got to be thinking of, because that's how this slope is now going to react. We're going to want to playtest this slope a little bit. To be honest, it's really just protecting this pin a little bit more than actually acting as something kicking a ball down to here. But we could put another pin here if we wanted to. There were kind of 5 possible locations on this green. Quite a big green, if I remember rightly. Yeah. The other thing that you'll notice is we've got this big consistent slope. Now, in addition to the red slopes, we're also going to want to bear in mind those consistent slopes. And from about this point, there's quite a long, consistent slope down to this pin. So once the ball starts rolling here and here and here and here and here and here and here, it's going to keep going. And it's whether we necessarily want that to happen. So we've got to be mindful of those. Now, it might be better to have a little tier in play, because that's kind of what this is. It's about how that's going to play. And to be honest, I don't really know with this one. That's the one I'm going to start play testing, hitting a putt and seeing how it goes, hitting an approach shot, seeing how the ball reacts. And then there's this one. We need to know whether this slope is going to kick the ball off the green or slow it down here. The green speeds are quite slow, so I'd hope that it would hold, but we want to be sure. The last aspect I think we've got is that there's an element of front to back on this green. So from here it starts running away, and I don't really know why that is. I think it's because that's what the land was doing, but it's the sort of thing you wouldn't have picked up on the previous game because it didn't really matter. Or it might have been just to funnel our slightly long shots a little bit further away. But we're going to want to check that as well. And you can see again, we've got this kind of, that's going to run the ball off the green. So we're going to sort that. And we had a little bit here where it's kind of almost a slightly crowned pin and it's now running down towards this hole. Do we want that? There's quite a lot that we're going to look at. In terms of what we're using tools-wise, it is mostly going to be that raised tool. I'll occasionally switch to this one where I want, often that will be going to flatten and just going around the edge. That's typically when I want to, you can kind of flatten up or down. Look at what the green is doing under the bead. So I might raise it up a touch and click here. And that'll make a little slightly flatter area, but also raising up this bit. But that in combination with raising off the edge of the green is going to get rid of those sides. With the tier, again, typically what I will do, if I wanted to make this into a little tier, we'll just raise by about 2 inches, click and drag around here. And then what you've got is a bit more of a slope. And you can either raise the top, which leads to a slightly, if you think you're raising this bit, that's going to lead to this area becoming a bit more flat. Or you can lower at the bottom, which is going to lead to this area becoming a little bit more flat. And again, it's how that works. But I want to avoid this like really consistent orange slope if we can, and this really consistent orange slope if we can, because those aren't playing so well in this game. Finally, if we want to sort out kind of bigger slopes, I'd take this brush and make it bigger. Again, if we wanted to make a general back to front slope on the screen, I'd probably do something like this. As you can see, your epicenter is here, which means that this bit's getting about 1 foot higher, 0.8, 0.5, nothing sort of thing. So it's creating that gradient. So I'll use that as well. In which case, what we're going to do now is we're going to leap into a bit of a time lapse and you can follow along and see how it goes. And so that's our green. That's what we've ended up with. And as you'll see, it's for the most part very, very similar to where we started. There's no real runoffs where I didn't want them to be. And particularly worked on this right-hand side because that's kind of where the low part of the land was. But that's still acting as a bit of a hazard, but that's where we talked about the slight misses. What I don't want is someone playing too close to the edge of the green. You want them to be rewarded with a bit of an uphill putt. You don't want them running off. Someone's missing around about here, they're still going to bounce down this way. That's the hazard, is missing the green and cheating too far to the right. So we've been careful with that. And I'll still play test this a couple of times yet before, just to check. We expanded this tier out a little bit because that, whilst the slope has remained the same height, it's now just happening over like less area, which means that there's a bit more access to this pin, which is a good thing. You also saw me play test shots, trying to bounce it into the tier to see how they react. So a ball up here ends up about down here, which is really kind of where I want it to be. You saw running shots using this, kind of funneling about to about here. So I've got a good idea of how those are going to react. You also saw me trying to putt from above the pin and seeing how that would react, and that stops comfortably staying on the green. Because again, that's a real frustration on tour. If people are putting and there's no way to keep the ball on the green, then that's kind of on the designer or the setup, either or. One thing with approach shots, you'll have noticed that I played from different areas. We had some where it was the 9-iron, which is the, if you've hit the perfect drive, you're ending up about here. But we want to consider, what if people don't take that on? If they play a 3-wood out to the fat of the fairway, well, they've got 200 odd in to this back pin. How's that playing? And you saw me hitting shots up to this area and down to here, and how the ball would react. You can land the ball up here, but equally, it's very easy to play to the middle of the green. You will stay on the middle of the green and you'd have a putt up. So there's some safety built in. You also saw the use of that slope on a running approach versus on an aerial approach, where the ball is, like, if you're coming in from here to this pin, that's going to be a very different shot to coming in from here. And we want to be looking at how the ball is going to react. Here, the shorter shot is just going to stop. The longer shot is going to roll out. So are you allowing it to do so? That's pretty much it. I hope that that was useful. The other thing you can always do, if you see a little slope like this, one way, if it's not green area that you want to use, you can always just bring the spline in a little bit, and that will, to an extent, get rid of that slope. However, it's not made the slope go away, it's just meant that it's no longer on the green, and what you've actually done is reduced your effective putting surface. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this because also the green grid orients itself to whichever perspective you're looking at it from. If you play a shot from over here, there's going to be slightly different slopes. And that's why it's important to playtest as well, because actually this slope might be much more orange than you think. It's just when you start playtesting from a different area, those green grids are now going to point towards you and it shows slightly different slopes. So as ever, I hope this has been helpful. In terms of how long this took, we're looking at around about 5 minutes, but that's me going pretty quickly, knowing what I'm trying to do. You can do it in, it might take more time just to get used to it and used to the tools, but it's really all about just gentle raises and lowers and flattens, knowing where they are. We're not saying make completely flat and boring greens. That's not the aim. The aim is ensuring that your intent is how it plays out in game, and that requires, because the ball physics have changed so much, that requires us to play test things and go away from, oh, if I put a red slope here, I know how it reacts. With this game, we don't. You have to play test because you're essentially relearning how slopes function, and therefore it's not going to be the same as in 21, and you can't expect it to work. And if you build the same greens as we were building at the end of 21, when we had Pro Swing, it's going to be a pretty rubbish time for players, and it's just not going to produce very good greens. Hopefully that helps. See you again soon.